Excellent. All right, so welcome everybody. We got so far 3 people: Mark, DJ, Suicidal, Disconnected. Love to see you guys here. It's always good to always see familiar faces here as well, because here at Zeno, right? And this is the moderator team as far as I'm talking to. We've got people here that need to learn more about this stuff. I mean, this is, after all, what Zeno is all about. So good to have you, right? Today we're going to talk about graphics processing units and GPU mining. Okay, now I know that Zeno doesn't necessarily do GPU mining, but it doesn't mean that we may not do GPU mining. So it's good to have the conversation, especially since GPU mining was really, in its history, one of the first, if not the second, sort of form of mining. I mean, the first was CPU mining, and we'll talk a little bit about CPU mining as well. But GPU mining specifically had become such a big powerhouse in this industry, and one of the reasons it's so good is that it's very accessible, right? You can build a normal PC and have it for video games and have it for work, and then also have it be able to mine cryptocurrency. That's one of the beautiful things about it, which helps in the form of decentralization, which, if you ask me, Ethereum did the wrong thing, but that's just my opinion. I'm a proof of work lover here. I'm sure, as most of us in Zeno mining probably are as well, for the simple fact that that's how we make our money. So let's dive into it a little bit more. So GPU mining and ASIC mining. Okay, the difference between the two. Okay, they have basically just a different approach. They do basically the same thing, except that you have a general purpose device, which is our GPU, versus something that is more specific to one application, right? And graphics processing units are basically great for doing the general amount of workload that you might have. And maybe in one class, maybe we can talk a little bit more specifically about computer components that might help educate some of our community. But these graphic intensive sort of projects that GPUs can do, aside from not just video games, movies, rendering, and all that kind of stuff, but we can actually use the GPU as a way to offload information from the CPU and process on the GPU instead, which is fantastic. All right, having a GPU to do something like that is just like having, a side cart for all of your projects to kind of be worked on, and having another team member help you and delegate that information to your team member. Right, you are the CPU in this case. So ASICs, on the other hand, they're custom built for one specific purpose. Okay, they cannot do general purpose things. So if you're mining with an ASIC, it's only going to be able to do that one cryptocurrency algorithm. Now, if you're lucky and you have something that can do multiple cryptocurrencies on one algorithm, for example, Litecoin can mine also Dogecoin, right? That's a simple way of being able to have a little more diversity with an ASIC. But the simple fact is that Dogecoin and Litecoin both operate on script algorithm. So because of that, they can be read by the ASIC machine. So ASICs are just optimized more so for efficiency and performance rather than a specific task. They're much better at mining, a specific cryptocurrency. And GPUs are, well, they're not, but they have the added benefit, right, of having flexibility. So let's talk about that. So GPUs having more flexibility gives them more, resale value. Having the ability to go from mining cryptocurrency to doing your, normal work stuff at home, to then being able to play a video game on your off time. I mean, there's nothing that you could say about a GPU that isn't to say that it's one of the most valuable parts of a computer. Which is why when we had the GPU and chip shortage during COVID, I mean, GPU skyrocketed. And, it is what it is. People want them. And performance, when it comes to efficiency, I mean, ASICs are, like I said, they're much more powerful. They're much more efficient. Even though, ASICs, they tend to run way, way higher wattage. Like an industrial ASIC is definitely like around 3,000 watts or something like that. And you'd be like, oh, well, that's a super power hungry machine there. And you'd be right. But, if we're talking about performance per watt, that ASIC is like outpacing the GPU by so much more. So, in a sense, it depends on what it is that you want, right? If you want something that just, specifically mines one cryptocurrency and that's all you really care about, get an ASIC. Also depends on what coins you're interested. Some coins are at this point fully, submerged with the ASIC community. When it comes to GPUs are much more diversified. And if you want to mine a coin that's GPU capable, that's something you'll have to make a decision of, but you won't be able to necessarily mine, profitably at least, coins that are mined by ASICs. It's just kind of how it goes. It's like a big competition, right? That's why we always upgrade our miners every, couple months, because it gets harder to earn rewards. You need to buy a more powerful machine, etc. So the cost, of course, ASIC mining is more risky because you are specifically mining one cryptocurrency. And you also are going to spend a lot more money on just the hardware itself. I mean, it's not a simple feat to create an ASIC, okay? Especially, like an L7 or, a K7 or any of these kinds of like industrial miners. They're very, very expensive to create. There's a lot of chips in them. You have to have these big hunky fucking power supplies. So it's just going to be much more expensive to go the ASIC route. And because of that, it's high risk, high reward. It's kind of like putting all your eggs in one basket with one of these ASICs. Luckily for enough, though, if you're not, if you don't have the funds or the electrical, setup, we talked about this in mining infrastructure. You can go ahead and look at that lesson. But we talked about how, having an ASIC in residential homes is very difficult unless you can find, companies that do ASICs for the residential home. For example, Gold Shell is a very popular one. If you're into Bitcoin at home, I like FutureBit. That's one of my favorites. But those are just some examples, right, of getting ASICs at home. Also, longevity and upgradability. So due to their application-specific nature, ASICs are only effective basically as long as a specific algorithm and cryptocurrency they were designed for remains dominant. Again, same thing with the flexibility, right? We're talking about if you want to, mine with an ASIC, you're committing to that coin with that ASIC. And, if things start to get, harder with the difficulty, which they typically will, it's going to be, at some point, time for you to upgrade to get a more efficient machine, etc. With a GPU, however, when you're talking about upgradability with a GPU, you could use the GPU upgrade for multiple reasons, not just cryptocurrency. So that's a benefit there too. Any questions up until now, or any thoughts or comments? I was just asking this question to some of you guys before we started the class, but anybody here else also mine with GPUs or is looking to mine with a GPU? Just curious. I guess that's why we're in Xeno. Everybody's like, nope. All right, well, anyway, let's talk about some of the system requirements in case you do become interested in doing something of the sort, right? You don't need a lot. You could honestly start with what you have. If you're on, a computer right now, you could most likely start mining with that computer right now. You can use any computer, desktop or laptop. It doesn't matter. Windows OS is definitely the easiest to use. Some people I know have Macs, myself included. I technically have a Hackintosh. If you don't know what that is, it's just basically a Windows machine that can operate Macintosh software. But I am actually using both at the same time. So Windows and Mac, it doesn't matter. You could actually mine with either one. There's more limitations to mining with a Mac, but there have been some exposure with at least the Apple Silicon computers, so you can actually mine with them. But it's much more efficient with Windows, and you have more options with Windows. So I would, if you're gonna be just talking about bare bones, trying to start mining, Windows is better, and we'll talk about some of the other OSs that are available if you want to get more customized with that. Linux is definitely the one that is more geared towards mining, period. Mainly because Linux is open source software. So because, and some people actually have a philosophy about this, right? They'll say, well, if you're going to do decentralized mining, the best way to do it would be to use decentralized operating systems too. So that's not necessarily a fact. It's just, a philosophy. So some people, they like to stick to that. Although some benefits do play out with Linux, which is one of the reasons why we'll talk about things like Hive OS and Rave and whatnot. Now, you can connect to the internet however you want. It's important to have a stable connection, more important than speed. Speed doesn't really do much for you here. The only reason speed would matter is if you're going to do something, let's say, like solo mining, where in solo mining, you're going to be competing against everybody else for finding a block. And if you find that block and it gets approved and registered before other people, because other people can find the same block as you do. The difference is that yours was the first one in line with the ticket for the lottery, so to speak, right? So if you have that as a very fast connection, then that can benefit you. But most of the time when we're GPU mining, most people, they don't really do solo mining. Some people do, but not most. They'll connect to a big mining pool, and all you need is just the ability to connect to the mining pool. And if you have a stable connection, you'll churn, profit, depending on your electrical rates and the price of the coin. You can connect via cable, Wi-Fi, USB. I recommend Ethernet is the best way, using cable. It's the most stable. The Wi-Fi can cut in and out. It's just not as dependable, but I think this is something that we all kind of know. Also, there's no difference between mining on a dedicated GPU rig versus mining on a PC. They are exactly the same. The form factor looks a little different, but they are exactly the same. And, with a rig, you can mount, 6 to 8 or more, and we'll talk about that too. So that's really all there is to it. It's just a different form factor, okay? Now, things are a little bit less optimistic when you're talking about laptops because graphic cards on laptops are not as strong as their desktop counterparts. So this is kind of like the same thing. Like it's very similar to the concept of saying, hey, I'm going to mine with an ASIC rather than a GPU. It's like ASICs are much more powerful. They're bigger machines. They're dedicated, right? You get a bigger, more powerful graphics card. It's going to be more powerful than mining with the laptop's graphics card that's built into the motherboard, right? So it's kind of the same idea too here. Not to say that you can't do it. You absolutely can. And if you want to do it, go ahead. That's there for you. And if you plan to use your laptop for mining, just make sure to take care of cooling your laptop, okay? Because everything with a laptop, it's such close proximity to each other. You can introduce something we call thermal throttling. And thermal throttling, if you don't know what that is, it's just the idea that your CPU, when it gets really hot, it starts to actually slow down purposefully so that it doesn't cook itself to death. So everything's just going to run a lot slower on your computer if you don't have that going. Um, any questions about system requirements? All right. So this is a big topic. Whether you want to choose Team Red or Team Green, right? AMD or Nvidia. Um, this depends also on a multitude of things. Nvidia tends to be easier to work with, and there's just easier ways to overclock your graphics card and just configure the settings on your graphics card when it comes to Nvidia. But AMD is a little bit more out of the way. You kind of have to configure it a little bit deeper than you would on the surface level with Nvidia. So if you're actually new to mining, Nvidia is actually easier to get started with. Not to say that AMD doesn't have similar results. It actually depends on the coin. Some coins, I don't know if anybody here has ever like played video games on their computer, but some computer games actually are designed to work better with AMD. Some are designed to work better with Nvidia. The same thing goes with crypto. Some coins are better mined with AMD. Some coins are better mined with Nvidia. It all depends. So, but at the same token, doesn't mean that you can't use either one for a specific coin. Both are absolutely usable for many, many different cryptocurrencies, and there's not really much that you need to do in that way. Typically, developers like to use NVIDIA because it's easier to code for as well. So, you might have like the one-off here where it's like way better with NVIDIA than it is AMD, but, you'd still be able to mine it. They're just, it's a matter of efficiency, really. That's what it comes down to. And for the most part, NVIDIA is usually the better card to go with. Personally, I use AMD, but that's because with my Hackintosh, AMD works much better. So I have a different reason for using AMD rather than using Nvidia with my setup, and it might be the same thing for you. Maybe you're an AMD fanboy and you want to use that for your gaming. Who knows? Versus the Nvidia, and AMDs are also they're just not as powerful. I mean, Nvidia kind of leads to charge on the graphics card sort of technology front. I mean, their graphics cards are just absolutely amazing. They have all this stuff like ray tracing that is just light years ahead of AMD. AMD is catching up, but I think in this case, NVIDIA is still king when it comes to graphics cards. So if you are still in the market or you're looking to build yourself a new PC, maybe consider NVIDIA if you want to do some, cryptocurrency mining. Okay, mining rig requirements. Here's a list of what you'll need to get started. Obviously, we need the GPU, right? The GPU is crucial here, but you'll only need one really to start the process. It's wise to seek the most efficient rather than the most powerful GPU. Because the whole point of the game is it's kind of the same thing with ASICs. It's like, why do we care about electrical costs so much? Why do I care if one is 8 cents per kilowatt hour versus 3 cents per kilowatt hour, right? Because that makes more profit on 3 cents per kilowatt hour. It's cheaper electrical rates, right? So if you're going to have something that's very power hungry at home, that could be a huge expensive bill for you. I mean, like, anybody here in California, I think it's like, what, is it 80 cents per kilowatt hour or something crazy like that? I mean, here in New York, it's like 12 to 15 cents, which is like not great. But I mean, some places are just absolutely ridiculous when it comes to electrical rate. So it all depends on where you're at, where in the world you are, I guess, and what you want to use your graphics card for aside from just GPU mining. And if it's just GPU mining, then it's better to find the best bang for buck, because that will allow you to mine longer. It won't be as expensive on the electrical, right? You have to factor in a couple of those things. And it's the same thing that we were talking about with ASICs, in a sense, right? I mean, some ASICs, you can't really do anything about it because they're just going to give you a certain electrical rate. on how much they consume, and that's it. You can't really do much other than that unless you want to do like immersion cooling. But you know, if you're going to do GPUs, they're way more customizable, so you can actually go in there and change the overclock settings to really fine tune to your specific setup how much you can mine per buck. And that's great if you want to get all geeky about that. And that's just one thing I want you to think about. The best graphics card is not necessarily the most powerful graphics card. Yes, the most powerful graphics card will mine the most cryptocurrency, but that may not work to your benefit in the long term, right? So something to think about. Also, the motherboard. When choosing the motherboard, you got a couple things to look for, right? Processor socket type, right? Because it depends on which chip you're going to use. And if you're going to be using, you know, like if you want to mine Monero or something like that, Monero is a CPU intensive type of cryptocurrency. So let's say you want to, you know, get a Ryzen, you know, AMD Ryzen, you know, type of chip, that will work very well for Monero. But you know, if you're going to use like Intel or something like that, you just got to make sure that you create your setup with the type of processor in mind, because that's the thing that's going to sort of control everything. So, you know, if you want to have a 12 GPU rig, you know, you got to get a motherboard that can handle that. Okay. And likewise, a processor that can control that too. So CPUs, if you want to mine with a CPU, you'll need to select a very high-end one, because a lot of processing power, all the processing power goes through the CPU, okay? That's why they call it the central processing unit, okay? It's the brain, essentially, okay? The motherboard's like your highway. So with all these connections to different GPUs, your CPU still has to control each one of them. But if you're going to be mining on GPUs primarily, you don't necessarily need the fastest CPU, okay? It's only if you decide that you want to have the CPU mine as well, where that becomes more, you know, of a concern for you. But if you just want to mine using GPUs, you don't need a very powerful CPU. Also, zip ties, okay? Zip ties, because if you're going to be building your rig, you want to make sure your stuff is secured really nicely, you know, just get some zip ties. It'll help things stay a little bit more rigid on your mining rig. All right, RAM. Okay, random access memory. It's also one of those things where RAM, people always get very confused about RAM. RAM is not necessarily what makes your computer faster. Okay, RAM, all it does is that it stores temporary memory that's waiting to be used at any given moment. Okay, so if you have more RAM, it means that you can have more background processes happening, because you can have the CPU sort of offload information into RAM and then recollect that information back really quickly. Okay, but that's all the difference is with RAM. So the only time RAM becomes really an issue is when you have like a very intensive program that requires like a lot of rendering or something like that, like video, audio, any of those types of programs, you know, they're going to be using a lot of stuff like RAM. In this case, for mining, RAM is not really necessary, because we're not really storing information. All we're doing is just processing information at a very, very fast rate. Okay, so that's the only concern here. That's why more powerful GPUs, more powerful CPUs are really more of a concern in this situation. Does that make sense? Okay. Of course, we also have our power supply unit. The rule of thumb when it comes to most computer builds is that your power supply unit should be usually twice the wattage of what your most powerful component is, and that typically tends to be the GPU. So if you get twice the amount, you're going to be totally fine with any surges or anything, and you have a ton of what we call headroom, right? That's between what your operating level is versus the maximum point of where your operating level can be. Now, if you have, you know, a lot of GPUs, you're probably going to use up more of that headroom, and that's okay as long as you don't exceed 80%. That extra 20% is there for you to compensate for any surges or anything like that. So you really don't want to exceed that, because if you start getting into that territory, that starts becoming very, very dangerous. And especially if you spike up over 100, you're going to, start fires. So GPUs can be very, very risky at that point. Risers. PCIe, or Peripheral Component Interconnect Express. Okay, so what a PCIe socket is basically just a way for you to add additional components to your computer, right? In this case, a graphics card. If you've ever built a PC before, if you've ever installed anything into your PC, you've probably used PCI Express before. Now, risers in this case are just extensions of PCIe's, and they basically allow your GPU to be mounted onto a frame so that you don't have them all inside this one, box for your computer. Okay, that's what they're for. You'll need an SSD as well, something, because that has to hold the operating system, of course. That's the first thing. But you might have, some data that you might want to utilize between them. And it'll also, if you want to run a node or something of that sort with your rig, you can do that with an SSD because it has to hold information from the blockchain. 240 gigabytes or larger will usually do it for just any standard build. But if you want to, if you want to hold, let's say, Bitcoin blockchain as a node, you're going to need at least like a terabyte because it's already over 500 gigs. All right, then you got the mining rig frame, which you can build yourself. You don't have to buy one, but you can build one if you want to do it. I would just recommend not doing it out of something like wood. Mainly because it gets very hot, and obviously wood can catch on fire, right? So we don't want to do that. Heat is better dissipated through something like metal, so that would be the better way to do it. And if you don't have the tools to make it, then just buy one. There's plenty of distributors out there that can sell that for you. A flash drive also is important that way. So when if you're going to build a dedicated GPU mining rig, you'll need to transfer data from, let's say, your own computer, which might have the operating system on the flash drive, and then you can install that onto the other computer. And just a way for you to transport information back and forth between any computer. Flash drives are always a good option for that. And if you're not going to be using a modular power supply unit that you would see with something like any computer build, like a EVGA type of power supply or something of that sort, that's just a company, by the way. So if you're not familiar with power supplies, there's many, many, many different power supplies out there and different companies that make power supplies. But if you're not building one that's usually dedicated to a computer, and let's say you want to get a more powerful power supply, let's say that an ASIC would use, which you can do. You could totally do that. Power is power, okay? Then you'll need to have something like a PCIe Y splitter or something like that in order for you to be able to feed off of that power supply. And if it doesn't have as many ports, you'll need to kind of split with that cable in order to feed your cables on your GPUs. Okay. Any questions about these mining rig requirements? Or thoughts or questions? Oh, I'm glad you think so, Suicidal. Yeah, it's kind of like one of those things where I think about it like when I got my computer, initially I built my computer for audio, right? I do high-end level professional audio kind of services. So that allows me to have a sort of benefit here because I did not necessarily intend to do mining when I first got my computer. This was before I got into mining and all that stuff. But it turned out that that computer actually was a pretty good computer for it. But however, when I started getting more serious about mining, I did make some upgrades, which I wish I did have before I started mining. I believe the power supply was a big one. So I would honestly, for the next computer that you ever build or that you ever buy, since now you're already exposed to the possibility of mining, think about that. You know, I would probably not mine with anything less than 1,000 watt power supply, which is something that I have here now in my computer. But when I had to redo the power supply, here's a very important piece of information about that. Change all the cables. Okay? Because the cables that came with the initial power supply that you might have bought are meant to operate for that specific power supply. So if you use that cable with your new, more power hungry power supply, now you might be bottlenecking some of that wattage in those cables. Okay, just be aware of that. All right, so it's a much more it's more frustrating to have to change a power supply than it is to have to change something like a graphics card. But if you have the wrong power supply, that could be very dangerous. So just make sure that at the core of everything that you're doing, right, the kind of motherboard, the kind of CPU, and the kind of power supply, those three are going to be the biggest factors in how you decide how much you can mine. Okay? Just a thought. All right, so now the question becomes, what do you mine, right? Okay, there's so many different coins out there. Well, really, you can mine whatever you want, right? If you are, I would say, mine what you believe in, right? That's always going to be my thought process with any of this stuff, right? I wouldn't mine, honestly, there was a whole entire season for Caspa, right? Caspa was getting a lot of attention in the not so distant past, right? And that was very enticing for a lot of people to begin GPU mining Caspa. However, before Caspa blew up, I mean, you were taking a very big speculative risk, right? You're paying for the electrical rate. You don't even know if Caspa is going to blow up. I would honestly say mine what you're comfortable with your risk. Okay, what you believe in, what with your risk. I didn't mind Caspa. I still don't mind Caspa because, I love Flux. Flux, I see a future in. Flux is something that I wanted to mine. I also have a Flux node. I have a whole bunch of things related to Flux. So my perspective on all of this is, similarly to how we'll do things with Zeno, we're mining blue chip cryptocurrencies. They're boring. They're not as exciting. But guess what? They're going to be here for the long haul. And I would much rather focus my attentions on stacking something that's going to be here for the long haul than speculating on some, new cryptocurrency. If you have like a separate rig that's, maybe not as powerful as your main rig and you want to experiment with some other coins with that, then by all means, mine Caspa, mine Nexa, mine any of these other, new cryptocurrencies. However, I would not use it as my primary mining algorithm, though. Okay, that's just my advice. Okay, to all of this, mine what if you're for the people who are getting into mining for the first time, mine something you're familiar with, right? So anyway, Bitcoin mining was actually GPU mineable before 2013, and before then it was CPU mineable around 2009. So we're talking like there was a big couple of years. I mean, like we're talking about. I mean, let's see here. I got in heavily into cryptocurrency in 2021, right? So it's already 2023. It's already 2 years in down the line. And a lot has changed. Now, I can only imagine what has changed between 2009 and 2013, right? There's a lot of time for there to be a lot of change. And, after 2013, that's when we started to get Bitcoin mining ASICs, and they started to really dominate the whole industry on Bitcoin mining. So, who's to say that what you're mining today won't be, ASIC mineable in the future? You've probably maybe heard the term ASIC resistant, right? Okay. What is ASIC resistant? It means, well, ASICs are going to have a harder time mining this. Well, you know what was ASIC resistant at what time? Bitcoin, Litecoin, okay? Any of these other coins, all right? At one point, they were ASIC resistant. Litecoin more so. And you could actually still mine Litecoin with a GPU. It's like Ethereum, right? Ethereum was also at one point, before they went proof of stake, they went ASIC resistant. It was GPU mineable. But there were also ASICs on the algorithm. So just because it's ASIC resistant doesn't mean it won't be taken over by ASICs, okay? It just means that's the initial intention. So here are a couple of cryptocurrencies that I kind of think about when I'm looking into, mining, and I've experimented with all of them. So you got Ethereum Classic, right? That's basically for anybody who was ever mining Ethereum. They're mostly going to be mining Ethereum Classic, and not necessarily all of them, but most of them, because you got to think, there were ASICs also in that algorithm. People had invested heavily into Ethereum. And so buying Ethereum Classic or mining Ethereum Classic after the merge from Ethereum was an obvious choice for many people. And it was a more predictable outcome too. There's Flux as well. One reason why I like Flux, and we could talk about all these other coins too if you guys want, but one reason why I like Flux was they have this thing called proof of useful work, which they're trying to do with graphics cards, giving them more utility essentially. So rather than just mining Flux, anything that's being run on Flux, like an application or program or rendering software, whatever's going to be using the Flux algorithm, can actually utilize the Flux network as one big giant, essentially like GPU, okay, or like a CPU, which is very, very cool. And if your graphics card gets picked up to be used for like a particular job, you're paid more in that Flux for that particular job, because now your GPU is actually working on a specific application, which I think is very, very cool. It's a new concept. It's just been implemented not too long ago, and there's a lot of use case for something like that rather than just having a cryptocurrency, right? So I love the utility behind Flux, and that's why I mine it. Then there's Monero, right? Privacy focused coin. I think there's always going to be a use case for privacy. Monero being one of those things that's leading the charge on that. Of course, been doing it ever since it started. Litecoin is now, we talked about Litecoin last time, and they're using Mimblewimble, right, as part of their algorithm. So that's a very, very cool way for them to add more utility to Litecoin. Then there's Ravencoin. So Ravencoin is interesting because Ravencoin is more of a community-driven coin. If you kind of think of it, it's very similar to kind of like Dogecoin. However, Ravencoin is more built on the principles of Satoshi Nakamoto. So it's trying to sort of emulate what Bitcoin was supposed to be, but it's a more ASIC resistant cryptocurrency. Okay. Now the thing about Ravencoin, I think, is very interesting is that it's open source, right? It's got the community driven, but it also requires more power to start with mining Ravencoin. So that's something you want to think about. But I mean, as far as like getting started with Ravencoin, is very simple. So that's something that's interesting for people. NiceHash. So NiceHash isn't actually a coin. It's actually an entire algorithm and platform. But if you're interested in, for example, like mining Bitcoin, but you don't want to use like an ASIC, you want to use your GPU, NiceHash is actually the best option in my opinion, because what it'll do is that it will mine all different kinds of altcoins automatically, right? So, and it'll do it by profitability too. So it'll say, hey, today Ergo is the coin that's most profitable, so we're mining that today. And then, tomorrow, it's Flux. Its next one is Ethereum Classic. And it'll mine that, and it will convert the rewards into Bitcoin and put them in your wallet, which I think is fantastic. So if you're interested in just stacking up sats, so to speak, right? There's my shirt. Stacking those sats is going to be much easier if you're doing NiceHash. So for those of you who are interested in that, that's a great one. And it's also super, super simple. You really don't need a lot to get started with NiceHash. And most of it is honestly like super user-friendly. Ergo is best for efficiency mining because Ergo doesn't require a lot of power. And if you have, a pretty decent graphics card, man, it could really do a good amount of mining for you. So I love Ergo for that. Not only that, it's also heavily backed by IOHK, Charles Hoskinson and Cardano and all that kind of stuff. So if you're a Cardano lover, not Ergo is a very, very good option. It's kind of like the proof of work algorithm that was designed for Cardano in a sense. Ergo is its own thing. They're not necessarily part of the Cardano foundation. However, they're very, very, very closely connected to them. And so a lot of things that people are looking for Ergo to be is a proof of work security measure for Cardano. That's just something that can be speculated on, but there is some potential there because there is very close connections. And then we talked about Caspa, right? You can do newer technologies. You could do Nexa. Nexa is a different one. Neoxa is another one. Neoxa is kind of interesting because Neoxa was designed for gaming. So if you're interested in that world, Neoxa, Neoxa, I think is how you spell it. Neoxa is a very good one maybe for you to think about mining because it's supposed to be proof of work for gaming blockchains. Okay. So anything that's very new has a lot of speculation for a ton of upside, and if that's what you're interested for and that's what you want, high risk, high reward, look for those kinds of coins. Also, by the way, whattomine.com, fantastic resource. If you don't know about whattomine.com, that should be like one of your go-to places to find out what's profitable in this market. And you can find out also whether or not your graphics card can mine it well. They have a whole lot of statistics. So if you're thinking about building a new rig, a new PC, go to whattomine.com, plug in some of the statistics that you see because they have everything there for you. Basically just say, hey, what graphics card do you want to see? How well does it work with a particular algorithm? And you can even see them in ranking order. What's the best graphics cards to use for that particular cryptocurrency? So that might factor into what you actually buy for your rig, okay? Great website. I highly, highly recommend it. Any questions about what to mine or any of these cryptocurrencies that I talked about?
Just wondering if any of those will be in consideration for future miners for Xenon.
At the current moment, not yet. That's a great question. But that's not to say that we won't get into that either. I think right now we're using because GPU mining tends to be more speculative at this point. Okay, it's not going to be like a blue chip crypto like Bitcoin or Litecoin. All of that stuff is all ASIC now, and that's what we're focusing our attention on currently. But after some point in time, we'll probably look into expanding at some point, perhaps maybe into GPU mining too. It all depends. I would look at GPU mining as a secondary priority to ASICs. We're probably going to be more interested in growing the ASIC farm because that's got a more predictable future for these blue chips. So we don't want to necessarily have too much risk into something like GPU mining, and that again, it's more complicated to do GPU mining setups, right? You have to build the motherboards, you have to get the components, you have to do all this stuff, right? Whereas an ASIC, you could just buy the machine and just plug it in, right? So in terms of that, we're probably going to do ASICs for a while. However, like I'm saying, at a certain point, this can certainly be a thing. It's not to say that it won't be. And I'm certainly interested in that. And that's part of why we're talking about it today, right? Because all of this kind of information, maybe it's not relevant today, but it could be relevant tomorrow, right? So it's a great question. And thanks for sharing that too. Ryu, sounds like NiceHash is the best for beginners. Is any coin mineable? What about coins like XRP? Great question. Not every coin is mineable. Some coins are already pre-mined. For example, XRP is definitely one of those. Some of the coins are only quote unquote mineable as being a node, right? Like Cardano. Okay, if you're a Cardano validator, then you can actually mine more Cardano. But that's only based upon being rewarded for finding a block. So, and all of that is essentially just stakers, you know, putting your validating node up for bid to find that block. And if you find that block, then everybody in that sort of pool then earns Cardano. But I think in the beginning, I think Cardano was like, I don't know if it was like 90% mined already. It's just like it was already like put up for the entire world to claim, which is one of the reasons why you'll see like, you know, Cardano is much more of in terms of its price, it's much lower because all of that is already in circulation, which is not a bad thing. It just means that it's not going to be necessarily mineable. So that's the only thing. So great question. And yes, Nice Hash is the best, in my opinion, for beginners, for most computers. There's other ones out there for if you're on a Mac, for example, like MinerGate is a great one. It's very similar to Nice Hash, but it's built for Mac and stuff like that. But yeah, great. Any other questions before I move on? Wonderful. Okay. Yeah. Don't be afraid to stop me if you have a question too. Let's take a look at some of this software. Choosing the appropriate software for your machine is just as important as finding high quality components for it. So there are dozens of cryptocurrency mining software to choose from, each with different features and intended for specific use cases. Essentially, you can think of it as hardware is nothing without software. And software is what? It's just a set of instructions for hardware to take action on, right? So if you have better software, you could technically make your hardware work better for you, right? So if you're in, you know, GPU mining and you're in it for like the long haul and you're like serious about it, you're probably going to try and use the best software that you can because that little bit of, you know, performance boost that you can get out of your card will matter for you. And that's why, you know, you'll get a lot of people who really mine seriously GPU stuff. They'll not use Windows or they won't use Mac, especially not Mac. They'll use Linux. And that's why that exists for them, right? Because they're serious miners. So here are kind of a list of different ones. Here we got CG Miner, best for experienced miners. Very, very, very popular one for that. Nice Hash, I definitely like it for beginners the most. BFG, that's best for customization. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Fan speeds, overclocking, all that kind of stuff. Very, very, very cool. Kudo Miner, best for different types of cryptos. That has the most sort of algorithms available for Kudo Miner. Just remember, right? Again, these are all developed by people, right? So if you're going to add a different algorithm to your, you know, if you want to mine Flux, or you want to mine, you know, freaking Caspa, your mining software has to be able to have that algorithm installed as a way to do it. Okay, so don't think that you can just download, you know, I don't know, like Ecos cloud mining and then be able to mine Flux with that. You know, you have to make sure that they have the algorithm that you want. Okay, so this requires just a little bit of research and seeing what algorithms have them. And if you use something like What to Mine, I think they tell you the softwares that can mine them too. Multi-miner is best for open source. If your philosophy is I'm doing open source mining with open source software, I'm going to use open source, you know, everything, then multi-miner is probably going to be for you. Cryptex is better for automation. So if you prefer to have things, you know, kind of automatically, you know, adjust settings and stuff like that based upon, you know, certain conditions that you might set. Maybe it's like heat settings and then you want your miner to turn down at a certain, you know, heat point, then that's what you can do with that. Cryptex is very cool with that. Cloud-based information like Ecos is interesting. It's something that I think is a little bit more newer in the idea where you're kind of tapping into a more decentralized server of mining. This is not something I'm totally familiar with, though, but from what I understand, ECOS is actually a very, very cool experimental form of mining. Awesome Miner is kind of designed for those who have a lot of mining rigs and they want to have more control over the entire conglomerate of all those miners. So if that's something that you're interested in or you have a mining farm, Awesome Miner can be a very good resource for that. And then Easy Miner is kind of like, in a sense, like nice hash, but a little bit more on the sort of, I don't know, like more independent. It'll mine one particular coin and you'll be paid for that one coin. Nice hash converts everything to BTC. Any questions about the software? All right, let's continue. When it comes to choosing the best OS, or operating system, it primarily depends on the hardware that you have. And if your mining rig is equipped with the latest graphics cards, you'll need fresh drivers and modern software. So older versions of the OS won't recognize them. Additionally, newer ones support a larger number of GPUs. For example, Windows 7 is now totally outdated and has a GPU connection limit of no more than 5 units at once. Since Microsoft no longer provides updates or maintenance after 2020. But if you have an older OS, you don't necessarily have a disadvantage. They take up less space, they contain fewer default programs, and support older motherboards and CPUs. So it might not be a bad idea to have an older OS for your mining rig. It'll take up, just less information. And what a lot of people, when they have dedicated mining rigs, they don't like to have a lot of information on their computer because that information can get in the way of mining. So if they like a clean slate with very, very minimal interference, I don't know if you probably have experienced this at some point in your life where, you have too much information on your computer. And what does that do? It slows things down, right? You have different tools that you can use. Some people like to use things like defragmentation, which will sort of organize all the information into a way that the computer can read it through faster. But at the same token, your computer is still processing so much information. So why give it extra information unnecessarily to process? And that's some of the things that you get with newer operating systems. There's like more programs and all that stuff that they just put right in there with you when all you want is just the OS, right? You don't need Microsoft Word, you don't need PowerPoint, you don't need all this shit. You just want to have Windows 7, okay? So sometimes people do that because of that. So some hold on to the vintage yet resource-friendly Windows 7, while others consider the more modern Windows 10 to be the best option. And then there are those who see Windows 11 as a replica of Windows 10, but more resource intensive. And all agree basically on one thing. 32-bit systems are useless for cryptocurrency mining. So there's no point in going anything older than Windows 7 to something like Windows XP or something like, or Windows Vista, right? You don't need any of that. 64-bit OS is the only thing that's suitable, and of course beyond, whatever that looks like, for this activity, right? So Windows 7 is known for its low resource consumption, striking a balance between system load and productivity, and only supports up to 5 GPUs. So if you don't have anything that's more than 5, maybe this doesn't really matter to you, and you just want a very simple rig, Windows 7 is a great option to start with. Windows 10, it's also you can get Windows 7 for free at this point, right? So Windows 10 as well offers the possibility to use more GPUs. There's at least 12 or more. But this OS is more complex to configure and may overlook the latest generation graphics cards. If you're going to use like the newest graphics cards, like the 4070 from NVIDIA, then you probably want to use Windows 11. And that was, for things that's released from 2022 to 2023, and obviously beyond, but may not recognize older hardware components. So if you're going to have, like a 1070, GTX 1070 GeForce that from NVIDIA. Probably not going to work as well on Windows 11 as it did on Windows 7. Something to think about, okay? There's so much to think about, right? I mean, there is like literally so much information to get with GPU mining that when you want to be very simple about it, this is why I say just start with what you have and just try it out. This is one of those things where it can be so customizable. Some people will just say, you know what, let's just go with the ASIC, because here's the thing, right? So if we're going back to the conversation about will GPU mining exist for Xeno, I mean, it could. It totally could. Not saying that it won't. But these are a lot of the questions that we'll need to ask ourselves on what is the best way to make our GPU mining farm the most efficient, right? So let's take a look. While hash rate doesn't differ when installing video cards on Windows 7 and 10, Windows 7 doesn't require updates, which can protect against overload or freezing. It also consumes fewer graphics core resources, but limits the size of the farm up to 5 GPUs. So as a result, Windows 7 is a suitable choice for beginner miners with a small budget. Windows 10 is a powerhouse with a plethora of customizable settings, but optimizing it for mining can be daunting compared to Windows 7. So for those looking to save money, using an unactivated official version of Windows 10 with limited functionality is a good option. And here's another thing. To avoid Trojan contamination, steer clear of custom builds from unknown sources. Instead, it's best to download the official version of Windows from the Microsoft website or obtain the original image through a torrent client. Pirated builds often contain unnecessary software that can impact the efficiency of your farm. Here's another thing too. Antivirus software, while it's great for multi-purpose use cases, antivirus software tends to get in the way of actually mining with a GPU. So I would recommend, either not having it at all for your rig, or if you're going to use it, if you're going to be mining with your personal computer, you're going to have to go through your antivirus settings and make certain like exclusions for certain pathways for your miner. Like I use Kaspersky, and Kaspersky, I love it, but damn, it's annoying. It gets in the way all the time. It's just, it looks at every single one of these files, because every time I get an update for something like LOL Miner, which is what I use, it always says, hey, this looks like it might be like a malware thing, because it's mining crypto. Anything that mines crypto, it'll always say, hey, should I quarantine this? Should I delete it? So I have to always say, no, ignore. Just be aware of that, okay? Antivirus stuff does get in the way. Again, if you're doing a dedicated rig, get the official version of whatever it is that you want to do. You could strip it down as much as you want, but don't install things like antivirus. And if that's the case, definitely don't just start using it to browse the internet with, okay, if you have no antivirus on it. That's something to think about too. Okay, let's talk about Linux. Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is a variation of Linux. Like Linux is its own thing, but Ubuntu is like its own version on top of Linux. And it's a popular choice for mining because of its accessibility and convenient GUI, right? Graphical User Interface, or GUI, people like to call it. Not everyone may need this feature, though. Basic command line skills are sufficient for setting up and managing this platform. Linux, though, is known for its reliability and stability, and which makes it a popular choice for those who need a dependable platform. It rarely experiences system crashes or other issues, and it can update itself while in use without requiring a reboot, making it a convenient option for those who want to avoid downtime. And for mining, many prefer to use specialized operating systems based on Linux, such as Hive OS, which is a Ubuntu alternative, and Rave OS, which is its own complete build on Linux. These software solutions offer better protection against viruses, support a wider range of GPUs, making them more secure, versatile. Okay, so let's take a look at Ubuntu. Linux native, so what's built just with Ubuntu. It's often considered one of the best choices for mining rigs with a user-friendly GUI, excellent security features, much more reliable than Windows, and requires minimal resources. You can honestly run Ubuntu and Linux and stuff all on a Raspberry Pi. It's like so simple, which is great. Additionally, since it is open source, it can be obtained for free, making it accessible to all, and highly resistant to viruses and network attacks, making it a top choice for security conscious miners. Now, with the right configuration, it can produce up to 45% higher hash rates compared to Windows, making it a serious contender in the mining world. Yet, with the latest graphics cards, the increase in hash rates may not be as significant. Hive OS, on the other hand, is specialized based on Ubuntu 16.04 LTS Linux version, designed specifically for mining cryptocurrencies via GPUs. So it's basically, just for mining. Its user-friendly interface allows for easy farm configuration, supports up to 19 devices. Hive OS offers an extensive range of features, including wallet management, software optimization for mining, GPU overclocking, hash rate monitoring, and many other operations to make mining more efficient and productive. Not only that, but you could actually remote control from Hive OS, which is great if you're out and about somewhere else. This is easily monitored and managed remotely through a web interface, so you can log into the website for Hive OS and then just see how your farm's doing. The OS is designed to run on minimal resources, making it suitable for older computers with as little as 2 gigabytes of RAM, and Hive OS can be installed on a USB flash drive, hard drive disk, or SSD. It only requires 8 gigabytes of free space. When it comes to installing and optimizing Hive OS, it only takes about 15 to 20 minutes of your time. Once the installation process is complete, you can basically start mining cryptocurrencies from that point, and you just have to really connect your wallet to the mining pool that you're using. Okay, Hive OS is great. It's for most people who want to start making the transition from Windows or something like that they started from, and they want to get more into like mining seriously. Hive OS is usually the one that they go to, because they don't have to deal with working with the Linux, command line or anything like that. They don't have to get to anything too advanced like Rave. They can just use something like Hive OS, which is much more simpler. It's definitely not for the beginner, but it's also much easier to learn. It's got a quicker learning curve than it does with other things like Rave. Which, speaking of, Rave is a complete customized OS built on Linux. It's not Ubuntu. It's its own thing, okay? And it was made to address the limitations and concerns of existing platforms based on feedback from users. So it works with over 600 pools, supports nearly 50 mining software products. With Rave, users can easily configure and control both ASIC and GPU farms. So that's, if you're like, I'm operating a total farm, Rave might be the thing that you want. And, again, it's more of the thing where people are going from Hive OS and now they're going to build, something much bigger, much broader. They're not just doing GPUs, but they are also including ASICs in their farm. Rave could be a great contender for that. So now this operating system boasts quick installation, device identification, making it easy to get started in mining in no time. Also, Rave is for free if you have a farm of up to 3 GPUs. With Rave OS, monitoring the state of your mining farm remotely is a breeze thanks to its mobile app, which is dope. You can easily detect overheating and a decrease in hash rate and take necessary actions to ensure optimal performance. While we have all these other types of things, let's talk a little about what's available for Mac, because that is definitely something that people do have. Apple Silicon powered machines are definitely capable of crypto mining, but I would look at Mac OS as a way for people to experiment with, not necessarily as a way for people to really commit to mining. I would never really mine for the long term on a Mac. But, if you want to just see what can be mined, I mean, maybe there will be in the future, cryptocurrency, maybe Apple. Maybe Apple's like, yo, we're getting into cryptocurrencies. We got our own crypto. So, AAPL coin, that's what you can mine with your Apple Mac, right? Who knows? Just fucking around. But if you don't want to purchase additional gear, you might want to experiment with Apple. That's kind of cool, right? Because Apple silicon chips, the GPU is built into the core of the motherboard, right? It's all flash-based information is all built in there, and their GPUs are like 76 cores at their max or something crazy like that, which is far more cores than what most graphics cards have. The difference is, right, it's software with hardware, that combination, right? Building on Mac for things like creative purposes like video production or audio Mac has always been king. So the thing is, though, when you're trying to build open source software, Mac wasn't really designed for that, right? Mac is very much of a more like, you know how Apple is. Apple's very guarded about everything about their software. They want everything to be like picture perfect and everything, right? So doing things open source on Mac, very, very tough to do. That's why a lot of people like Windows. That's why people love to do Linux. And that's why all of these OSs that we've been talking about, like Hive OS and Rave, are built on Linux, okay? Mac is very difficult to get through. Overall, it's still viable. M1 and M12 chips just aren't really that optimal. But you can give it a try if you're curious. Here are some software that you can use on Mac OS if you're interested. CG Miner, BFG Miner, Multi-Miner, and MinerGate, which is just the easiest mining software for beginners to use on Mac. Probably one of the things that you'll benefit maybe with a Mac, maybe Monero, but not really much else from my experience. That's just me personally. Any questions about the OS that I spoke about? We're almost there, folks. We're almost done. Let's just talk about the risks of GPU mining, okay? More susceptible to fraud. It's easy for scammers to perform crypto mining. Scams generally involves taking your earned cryptos. You could, if you accidentally downloaded malware, unintentionally, of course, right? Because accidental. But if you download malware, some of that malware could actually configure your mining software to mine towards the hacker's wallet, right? So you might not even know that your stuff was being taken until you start looking at reports and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, whoa, what's going on? Why can't I mine to my own wallet, right? So because of that, you could be exposed to fraud much more than like an ASIC. ASIC, if they hack your network, that's a different story. But like they could just, when it comes to PCs are so easy to hack in comparison to something like a network at your own home. A hacker really has to be very, very specifically trying to hack your network. That's why, okay, never share like your IP address out there in the open, right? So that's why if you take screenshots and stuff of what your own personal setups look like, blur out IP addresses and all that stuff, because a hacker can use that information, hack your personal network, and then hack, your ASICs and all your GPUs. But if you're just using like, a personal home setup, you don't share any of that information with anybody, a hacker can get into your PC and hack your GPU. So that's something you got to be aware about. You will also earn less money with GPUs. Unless you're just mining ASIC resistant coins where like Ergo or Flux, where they're pretty much predominantly only using GPUs. If you're going up against like ASICs, like Ethereum Classic, for example, like you're not going to mine anywhere close to an ASIC can. So just that's a risk. Also, computing hardware. Miners should own the latest hardware to compute with an increasing need for successful crypto mining. So you're going to, probably think about upgrading your graphics card maybe a little more often. I mean, they come out faster, I think, do they come out faster than ASICs? I think probably ASICs come out faster than that, but I don't know. You just got to be aware that when a new thing comes out, your stuff is already outdated. Which is what I hate about the computer industry to begin with in the first place, right? You buy a new graphics card, and all of a sudden, like a month later, there is a new graphics card out, and now yours doesn't compete as well as that one did. Also, there's more complexity. This is an obvious one. We've just been discussing it this entire time. We have to build everything from the ground up when it comes to GPU mining. That requires more technical knowledge. More complexity is added to this entire thing. It's not like an ASIC where you can just plug it in, log in, and then you're done. But what are the benefits in this case? Why would we mine in the first place? So firstly, GPUs are versatile. Can be used for various computing tasks beyond mining, right? They're a more flexible investment. Somebody may not be interested in your GPU because you mined with it, but they may be interested because it's great for video production, or it might be great for video gaming, right? Secondly, GPU mining allows for algorithm flexibility, right? Hence why something like Nice Hash is so cool, right? I can mine with Nice Hash and just mine any different kind of algorithm that's more profitable that day and earn in Bitcoin. That's so cool. Like, you can't do that with an ASIC. And the adaptability enables miners to switch between coins or algorithms based on market conditions, potentially maximizing profitability. Additionally, GPU mining is often more cost effective than ASIC mining, as GPUs are generally more affordable and have better resale value. Right now, GPUs are like so in the tank when it comes to price. If you're looking to build a rig soon, this is a great time to get GPUs. So just food for thought. This accessibility makes GPU mining a viable option for individuals or small-scale miners. Lastly, GPU mining contributes to the decentralized nature of cryptocurrencies, as it enables a broader participation of individual miners, enhancing network security. So that's my conclusion here for GPU mining. Do we have any sort of questions or comments? Let's open up the floor a little bit and let's just talk about it. What are your thoughts about GPU mining? Rio is typing here. Okay. Do I have official links so we don't Google our way into trouble? So official links to what, if I may ask? Like manufacturers, or what do you mean? Nice Hash. I think you can just type in nicehash.com and you can find that right there and then. As far as like computer components, you could go on Amazon. You can go on Newegg. Newegg is a great resources for a lot of computer enthusiasts. Newegg.com, as far as I understand it goes. When it comes to algorithms, though, some algorithms are available directly on GitHub, but most of the time, there are a couple of GPU mining enthusiast YouTubers out there. Look into it. You don't have to like these guys, but they actually do have official links for a lot of these things. For example, Voscoin definitely does. Son of a Tech is really good. Let's see. Here's another one. Seb Fintech, I think is his name. These are just a couple of YouTubers. So if you like, for example, if you want to look up a specific tutorial on how to mine a particular crypto, those are some influencers that I recommend because they have really great tutorials online on those specific coins. Oh, the whattomine.com. Yeah, what to mine. Yeah. You could probably also find like all that information there too. Yeah. That's a super good resource. Yeah, absolutely. The thing about GPU mining is that it's a little bit, it's not like, like NFT projects, right? Like you can't just go on Discord and then find, an NFT project that does this stuff. You gotta find it online in some way, shape, or form. Like they all have their own official websites. I'm sure CG Miner, LOL Miner, but some of them are not. Some of them are just open source and they just have their code available on GitHub and you have to download it there. I mean, that's just the way of the open source world. Awesome. Any other questions or comments? All right, folks. Well, this was great. Thanks for your time. I know this went on a little longer than my usual class, but this one was very, very, very jam-packed with a lot of information, and I'm sure there's, stuff you'll have to sit on and just absorb a little bit more, because I'm sure that the information that I shared today is not going to all absorb in one sitting. But that's why I upload this stuff for you to rewatch, and you have the slides here also for your information, so you don't have to go ahead and keep looking at information. This is a lot of information that I go and search for myself, right? And I just kind of put it all into one place. So that's what we do here for you. But yeah, beyond this, I think next week we could talk about many different things. We still have a couple of things that we can get into. Maybe we can talk about some of these other GPU tokens if that's something you're interested in. We can talk about some more exterior stuff to mining stuff. I could talk about computer basics, learning more about the specific components of computers and what they do and why they're important. We can do that. We could talk about future computing. I know people have mentioned quantum before. We can talk about artificial intelligence. Anybody have any thoughts about that before we go? Okay. Yeah, XRP could be a one that we can dig into. I know we have some relations with people involved with XRP Ledger. So I think it was Terror Teddies or something like that. Might not be a bad idea to talk about stuff like that. These could be things that, in the future, Zeno adds to its treasury holds. So could be very, 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 very interesting. All right, I'll consider that. I'll probably put out a poll in the next few days for what people are interested in learning about. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.